My name is Walter Greer. I am 69 years old, and for the past 5 months, I have been convincing my nephew that I am losing my mind. He believed every word of it. That was his first mistake. His second mistake was assuming that because I am old, I am easy. His third, and most fatal, mistake was doing it in my own house. Let me start at the beginning, because this story does not make sense without it. I spent 41 years as an architect. Not the kind who draws pretty sketches for rich people's vacation homes, though I did some of that in the early years when the bills needed paying. I built hospitals, municipal courthouses, university libraries, structures that were meant to last. Structures that required you to understand not just beauty, but load-bearing walls, stress points, the invisible forces that could bring everything down if you miscalculated. I retired 18 months ago and sold Greer Design Group to a regional firm out of Charlotte for $3.8 million. It was a fair price. I was not sad to see it go. What I was sad about was Eleanor. My wife of 43 years passed 11 months before the sale closed. Pancreatic cancer. 6 weeks from diagnosis to the end. We had no time to prepare, no slow goodbye, no chance to say everything we should have said over 4 decades of loving each other. One morning, she was complaining that the coffee was too weak. 2 months later, I was standing at her grave in the rain, holding an umbrella over a hole in the ground that had swallowed everything that mattered to me. I will not dwell on the grief. Anyone who has buried a spouse understands it. Anyone who has not, I hope you never have to. What I will tell you is what the grief did to me in practical terms. It made me slower, more thoughtful, less interested in the noise of the world. I started spending more time in my wood shop in the back of our property in Franklin, Tennessee, just south of Nashville. I made furniture, chairs, mostly. Eleanor had always wanted a proper rocking chair for the back porch, and I had always been too busy to make her one. I made 14 of them in the 8 months after she died. I gave most of them away to neighbors. The last one I kept. I was sitting in it on the back porch, reading, on the evening that my nephew Trevor called and suggested I might want to think about getting my affairs in order. He did not phrase it that way, of course. Trevor was clever with words. He had Eleanor's brother's eyes and a smile that cost more than it was worth, and he knew how to dress a bad idea in the clothes of genuine concern. He was 44 years old, 6 feet tall, tan in a way that suggested he spent more time managing his appearance than managing his business. He called himself a real estate developer, which was technically accurate in the way that calling a brush fire a campfire is technically accurate. "Dad always looked up to you," he said, referring to his father. "My brother Gary, who had died of a heart attack 7 years earlier. I just want to make sure you're taken care of, Uncle Walt." Eleanor would have wanted that. Do not use my wife's name to sell me something, I thought. But I said, "I appreciate that, Trevor. I'm doing fine." He was quiet for a moment. Then, gently, "I heard you left your car running in the driveway for 3 hours last week." Mrs. Patterson mentioned it. Mrs. Patterson was my neighbor. She was also, I would later discover, the source of several other stories that Trevor had been collecting and polishing for months. I had left the car running. I will not pretend otherwise. I had been distracted, thinking about Eleanor, had gone back inside to get something, and simply forgotten. It happened once. It was the kind of thing that happens to people of every age. But in Trevor's hands, it became a data point. That was August. By September, I noticed a pattern. My daughter Sophie, who lived in Memphis and called me every Sunday, started asking different questions. Not "How are you doing, Dad?" but "Are you sleeping okay? Are you keeping up with the bills? Have you seen your doctor lately?" Sophie was 38, a high school principal, practical and loving, and not given to worry without cause. Someone had given her cause. By October, I called my attorney. Frank Hollins had been my lawyer for 22 years. He was 63, compact and quiet, with a mind like a steel trap and the patience of a man who had seen human beings at their very worst and had long since stopped being surprised. I told him what I had noticed. The calls, the questions, Trevor's sudden interest in my well-being after years of Christmas cards and occasional birthday texts. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he said, Give me 2 weeks. He needed 10 days. He came to my house on a Tuesday morning with a manila folder and an expression that told me what was in it before he opened it. Trevor's real estate development company had 3 active properties and roughly $4 million in debt attached to them. 2 of the properties were behind on their banknotes. The third was under a lien from a contractor who claimed Trevor had not paid him in 11 months. Trevor's wife, Sasha, had filed for divorce 14 months ago, then withdrawn the petition 4 months later for reasons Frank could not determine but suspected were financial. They had 2 children in private school. The tuition alone was $60,000 a year. I stared at the documents. How deep is he? Frank hesitated. Best estimate, he said. Trevor is about $2.1 million in the hole, and the walls are closing in. His investors are getting restless. A couple of them have hired attorneys. And my money, I said. That's what this is about. Frank nodded. He put another document on the table. This one I had to read twice to believe. It was a preliminary consultation form from a law firm in Brentwood that specialized in adult guardianship and conservatorship proceedings. The client intake information listed Trevor Greer as the petitioner. The subject of the proposed guardianship was listed as Walter Greer, age 69. Under reason for petition, someone had typed, cognitive decline, inability to manage financial affairs, concern for physical safety. The form was dated 6 weeks earlier. I sat for a long time without speaking. Frank did not rush me. Outside, a cardinal landed on Eleanor's bird feeder, the one she had hung from the oak tree the year before she got sick. She had loved cardinals. I watched it peck at the seed. He is going to try to have me declared incompetent, I said finally. That is my assessment, Frank said, so he can take control of my accounts. And your property? The house alone is worth $800,000. Combined with the sale proceeds from the firm, he would have access to potentially $4.5 million. And Sophie, does she know? Frank was quiet for a moment. He chose his words carefully. I think Trevor has been working on her. I do not think she is part of this, but I think she has been fed enough small stories, enough carefully selected details about your state of mind, that she is primed to believe it if Trevor makes his move. I looked at the cardinal again. It flew away. So, what do we do? I asked. Frank folded his hands on the table. We set a trap, he said. The next 5 months were the strangest of my life, which is saying something, because my life has included a collapsed building in 1994 that should have killed 3 of my workers, and somehow did not. A federal contract dispute that cost me 2 years and nearly my firm, and watching my wife die in a hospital bed while holding her hand and telling her it was okay to go when every part of me was screaming at her to stay. But pretending to lose your mind while watching someone try to steal everything you have built, that is its own particular kind of strange. Frank hired a firm he trusted to install cameras in my home. Not everywhere, just in the main living areas, the study, the front entryway. He had my phones monitored, legally, with the appropriate documentation. He began building a file. I began building a performance. I started calling Trevor more often. Not so often it seemed suspicious, just often enough to seem like a man who was lonely and a little uncertain of himself. I let my sentences trail off occasionally. I repeated a story about a trip Eleanor and I had taken to Vermont, told it to him 3 times over 6 weeks as though I had forgotten I had already told it. I mentioned once that I had trouble remembering which day my trash pickup was, even though I had known the answer for 15 years. Trevor was attentive, warm. He called me back promptly. He started suggesting things gently. Maybe you should let me take a look at your investment accounts, Uncle Walt, just to make sure everything is in order. Maybe you should think about updating your will. Maybe you should come stay with us for a while. The house must be so quiet. I declined everything. But I declined with confusion, with hesitation, with an old man's uncertain voice. I gave him just enough resistance to make his eventual victory feel earned. What I was not prepared for was Sophie. She drove down from Memphis in November, unannounced, on a Saturday morning. I heard her car in the driveway and looked out the window before I answered the door, and I could see from the way she was sitting behind the wheel for a moment, before getting out, taking a breath, steadying herself, that this was not a casual visit. Someone had told her something that required courage to confront. She looked like her mother when she was anxious. The same small crease between her eyebrows, the same way she pressed her lips together slightly before speaking. I made coffee. We sat at the kitchen table. She wrapped both hands around her mug and looked at me. "Dad," she said, "Trevor called me." I waited. "He said you forgot his name when he called last week. He said you called him by Uncle Gary's name." I had done that deliberately. It was one of the more precise things I had done, calling a 44-year-old man by the name of his dead father, because it was the kind of detail that sounds too specific to be fabricated and too unsettling to dismiss. "Sophie," I said, letting my voice carry just a slight waver. I was having a bad day. I was tired. It was a mistake. She reached across the table and took my hand. "Dad," she said gently, "I know this is hard to hear, but Trevor said this has been happening more than once. He said Mrs. Patterson told him you were confused about Eleanor, that you forget sometimes she's gone." That particular lie was the cruelest one, and I had to work to keep my face neutral when she said it. Mrs. Patterson had said no such thing. Eleanor was not someone I forgot about. Eleanor was someone I thought about every hour of every day. But Trevor had understood that if he wanted to reach Sophie, he needed to reach her through her mother, through the one vulnerability that grief had left open. I looked down at the table. "Maybe I have been a little confused," I said quietly. Sophie squeezed my hand. "I love you so much," she said. "You know that. Whatever you need, I am here. I just want to make sure you are taken care of." She drove back to Memphis that afternoon. I stood at the kitchen window and watched her go, and for the first time in 5 months, I felt something that was not anger or cold, strategic patience. I felt something that was simply sadness. My daughter was trying to protect me. She did not know she was being used to do it. I called Frank that evening. "We need to move faster," I said. Frank had been thinking the same thing. He had a contact at the Nashville field office of the state's Adult Protective Services Division. More importantly, he had been building a relationship with 2 investigators who specialized in elder financial abuse, and he had found something new. Trevor's company, 2 weeks earlier, had incorporated a new entity, a property management LLC. The listed assets included a residential property in Franklin, Tennessee. The address was mine. He had already put my house in his company's paperwork. He had not asked. He had not forged anything yet, but he was preparing the container. He was getting ready to fill it. "I'll handle the rest," Frank said. My 70th birthday fell on a Saturday in January. I had not planned to celebrate it, but Frank suggested we give Trevor a stage, a family dinner. Enough people present to serve as witnesses if anything happened, but intimate enough that Trevor would feel comfortable making his move. We invited 12 people, old friends, my sister-in-law Carolyn, Sophie, and Trevor and Sasha. I spent 2 weeks before the dinner continuing my performance. I called Trevor on a Wednesday and asked him twice within the same conversation whether we had spoken recently. I told him I had been having trouble sleeping, that I sometimes got up at night and could not remember what I had gone downstairs for. He listened with that warm, practiced concern, and at the end of the call he said, "Uncle Walt, I have been thinking, there is a doctor I want you to meet, a specialist. He has helped a lot of families in situations like this." I knew what that meant. Frank had warned me it was coming. I said, "Maybe that would be a good idea, Trevor. Maybe I do need some help." I could hear the careful satisfaction in his voice when he answered, "I am going to take such good care of you, Uncle Walt. I promise." Do not make promises you cannot keep, I thought. I have been building things that last my entire career. I know exactly how much weight a structure can hold before it collapses, and yours, Trevor, is already cracking. The birthday dinner was on a Saturday night. I cooked, because I have always cooked, and Trevor needed to see me in my own home, confident in my kitchen, before the performance started. Pot roast, Eleanor's recipe, the one that required 3 hours and more attention than most people give to anything. Old friends from the firm came. My college roommate Dennis drove up from Chattanooga. Carolyn sat at the far end of the table and watched everything with the sharp eyes of a woman who has been watching people her entire life. Sophie sat next to me. She refilled my water glass twice without being asked. She was watching me, not with suspicion but with love, and that was almost harder to bear. Trevor arrived 40 minutes late with Sasha and a man he introduced as Dr. Philip Marsh. He said it casually, as though bringing an uninvited doctor to a birthday dinner was a perfectly ordinary thing. Dr. Marsh was in his late 50s, silver-haired, with a careful handshake and the particular manner of a man who had rehearsed his warmth. He said he was a specialist in cognitive health and aging, and that Trevor had told him so much about me. I shook his hand. I looked at him with slightly unfocused eyes and said, "I am sorry. I don't think we have met. Are you a friend of Eleanor's?" The table went quiet. Dr. Marsh smiled smoothly. "We have not met before, Walter. I am a friend of your nephew's. He thought it might be nice for me to join your celebration." "Eleanor was my wife," I said slowly, as though I were trying to orient myself. "She passed away. I forget sometimes." I heard Sophie make a small sound beside me. Trevor put his hand on my shoulder. "We are all here for you tonight, Uncle Walt." After dinner, when the plates were cleared and the birthday cake had been cut and Dennis had told the story about the Vanderbilt football game in 1977 that made Carolyn laugh until she cried, Trevor asked if he could speak with me privately in my study. He brought Dr. Marsh. Sophie started to follow us. Trevor touched her arm. "Let us give him a few minutes," he said gently. "This is hard for him." She stayed in the dining room. I saw her face as I walked down the hall. She believed him. She was trying so hard to believe that her cousin was doing the right thing by her father. I sat in my study, in the leather chair I had bought the year I made partner. Trevor and Dr. Marsh sat across from me. The hidden cameras Frank's team had installed were built into the bookcase hardware, completely invisible, unless you knew exactly where to look. I knew where to look. "Uncle Walt," Trevor began, his voice gentle and rehearsed, and full of the kind of care that costs nothing to perform. "I want to talk to you tonight because I love you. Because this family loves you, and because we are worried." I let my hands rest in my lap, slightly unsteady. Dr. Marsh leaned forward. "Walter, I specialize in working with individuals who are experiencing challenges with memory and cognitive function. From what your family has shared with me, I would like to suggest that we schedule a formal evaluation. In the meantime, there are some steps we can take to make sure you are protected." "Protected," I repeated, as though the word were new to me. "Your finances," Trevor said. "You have a lot to manage, Uncle Walt, and with everything you are going through, it is a lot of stress for one person. I have been thinking, and I believe the simplest thing, the kindest thing, would be for you to allow me to take over management of your accounts. Just temporarily, just until you are feeling more like yourself." I blinked. "Take over," I said slowly. "Just to help?" Trevor said. He reached into his jacket and produced a folder. He set it on the coffee table between us. I looked at it without moving. "These are straightforward documents," Dr. Marsh said. "A durable power of attorney and a voluntary conservatorship agreement. They would allow Trevor to act on your behalf legally and financially. They are completely reversible if and when your situation improves." I stared at the folder. My hands were still in my lap. I let them tremble slightly. "I'm scared," I said softly. Trevor came around the coffee table and crouched beside my chair. He put his hand on my arm. "I know," he said. "I know this is frightening. But you do not have to be scared anymore. Just sign these and let me take care of everything. That is all you have to do." I looked at him. For a long moment I just looked at his face, at those eyes that were so much like his father's, at the smile that was nothing like his father's, because his father, Gary, had been a genuinely good man who had never once in his life tried to take something that was not his. I looked at Trevor and I thought about Eleanor, about the cardinal on the feeder, about the 14 rocking chairs in the shed, about 41 years of buildings that had not fallen down because I had understood the forces that cause things to fail. Then I let my shoulders drop and I reached toward the folder. "I would be grateful," Trevor said. His voice had a new quality in it, something just beneath the warmth, relief. The relief of a man who has been holding his breath for months. I stopped. I pulled my hand back. "I need to think about this," I said. "Can I have a moment?" "Of course," Trevor said. "We are not in any rush." He stood and walked back to his chair. He glanced at Dr. Marsh. "Actually," I said, "I would like a glass of water." Would one of you mind? Trevor stood again immediately. He went to the door and called down the hall for Sasha. Sasha appeared 30 seconds later with a glass of water. She handed it to me. Her smile was the same category as Trevor's. Practiced? Expensive. I took the glass. I looked down at it. I looked up. I want to read you something, I said. My voice was no longer wavering. Trevor frowned. Uncle Walt? I stood from my chair. I straightened up, and I looked at my nephew across my study in my house, surrounded by 41 years of the work of my hands. And I said clearly, Frank, I think we have everything we need. The door to the attached sitting room, which I had left slightly ajar, opened. Frank Hollins walked out, holding a small recording device in one hand and a tablet displaying live video feed in the other. Behind him came two people I had never met, but had been expecting. Detective Angela Reese and Detective Marcus Fowler from the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation, Elder Financial Abuse Unit, both of whom had been sitting in my kitchen for the past 2 hours, eating the pot roast that I had deliberately made too much of. Trevor stood up so fast he knocked his knee on the coffee table. What is this? He said. His voice had changed completely. The warmth was gone. What was underneath it was uglier and smaller than I had expected. This, Frank said calmly, is a recording of you and your associate attempting to obtain a fraudulent conservatorship over a mentally competent adult. It is also a recording of you presenting falsified medical credentials. Since Dr. Philip Marsh's real name is Vincent Cutter, and his license to practice medicine in the state of Tennessee was revoked 8 years ago, following a conviction for insurance fraud. Trevor turned to look at Cutter. Cutter was already looking at the door. Do not, Detective Reese said pleasantly, and Cutter stopped. This is a misunderstanding, Trevor said. His voice was tight and cracking at the edges. Uncle Walt, I was trying to help you. You have been confused. You have been struggling. I was trying to protect you. I picked up the folder from the coffee table. I flipped it open and looked at the conservatorship documents, the power of attorney forms, the signature lines waiting for my name. Then I looked at my nephew. You listed my address as an asset of your LLC 3 weeks ago, I said, before I had signed a single piece of paper, before this meeting ever happened. You were not protecting me. You were taking inventory. Trevor's mouth opened, closed. There is more, Frank said. He tapped the tablet. In September of last year, Trevor Greer filed a preliminary guardianship consultation with a Brentwood law firm, citing cognitive decline 6 weeks before he had any documented contact with any medical professional regarding his uncle's condition. His wife made 12 phone calls to Walter Greer's neighbor between August and November of this year. We have phone records. We have the consultation form. We have emails between Trevor and Vincent Cutter going back 7 months, discussing strategy. I am going to need you to place your hands where I can see them, Detective Fowler said to Trevor. Trevor turned to look at me one more time. His face had cycled through shock and denial, and had landed somewhere that I recognized from buildings that have been under too much stress for too long. A kind of structural failure. Everything holding him up, just letting go at once. I trusted you, he said. His voice was almost confused. I trusted that you were too old to fight back. I smiled at him. I am not too old. I was too patient. Those are different things. The detectives moved toward him. I walked out of my study and back down the hallway toward the dining room, where Sophie was sitting at the table with Dennis and Carolyn and the remains of a birthday cake. She looked up when she heard the commotion, and then she looked past me at the detectives walking Trevor and Cutter through my hallway toward the front door. She stood up. She looked at me. Dad, she said. Her voice was very small. I sat down beside her. I took her hands in mine. Here is what I want to tell you, I said. I know you were trying to protect me. I know you believed what Trevor told you because you love me and you were scared, and he gave you exactly enough to make the fear feel real. That is not your fault. That is what people like him do. Her eyes filled. She shook her head slowly. I doubted you, she said. I sat in this kitchen and I told you that maybe you needed help, and I believed him over my own father. You believed someone who was lying with great skill over someone who was telling the truth while deliberately seeming confused, I said. That is a much more forgivable mistake than it sounds. She made a sound that was somewhere between a laugh and a sob. I held her hands. Outside, I heard a car door close. The night was quiet again. The prosecution took 8 months. Frank had built a case file so complete that Trevor's own attorney strongly advised him to consider a plea, which he refused because Trevor had spent his entire adult life believing that his charm was a structural element rather than a decorative one. He believed, right up until the jury came back, that he could talk his way out of it. He could not. The jury convicted him on 3 counts: conspiracy to commit financial elder abuse, attempted fraudulent procurement of a conservatorship, and filing false documentation with intent to defraud. The judge sentenced him to 9 years. He stood in that courtroom and looked at me with the particular expression of a man who has just understood something too late, something that would have changed everything if he had understood it sooner. Vincent Cutter pleaded guilty to 2 counts of practicing medicine without a license and conspiracy. He received 4 years. Sasha had known, though her knowledge was harder to prove. She had made the calls to Mrs. Patterson. She had coached Trevor on specific incidents to mention to Sophie. Frank had the phone records and a text message exchange that was damning in tone, if not completely explicit in content. In the end, she pleaded guilty to 1 count of conspiracy to commit elder abuse. She received 18 months and was ordered to pay restitution. I was in the courtroom for all 3 verdicts. I thought about Eleanor the whole time, not with bitterness, not with the particular anger that Trevor had brought out in me during those 5 months of performance and patience, but with something quieter. Gratitude, maybe. She had always said that the most important thing I built was not any structure with a foundation and walls, but the life we had built together. She had always been right about everything important. Sophie sat beside me for every day of the trial. She did not say much. She is not a woman who uses words when silence is more honest. But she was there, every day, and that was its own kind of statement. The hardest conversation came about 3 months after the sentencing. She drove down from Memphis on a Sunday, and we sat on the back porch in the January cold with coffee and the rocking chair beside us. She looked at me for a long time before she spoke. I knew something was wrong, she said. Not about the money, not about Trevor specifically, but I knew for months before he called me that something felt off whenever I spoke to him about you. He was too informed, too specific. The details he gave me were too perfect. Why didn't you say anything? I asked. She turned her mug in her hands. Because saying it out loud would have meant admitting I was afraid. And if I was afraid, I would have had to figure out whether the fear was about you losing your mind or about me losing you. She looked at me. I think it was both. I think I let him scare me because part of me was already scared. And he gave that fear a shape and a name and made it feel like concern instead of grief. I looked at her for a moment. She had Eleanor's honesty, the same willingness to say out loud the things that most people only think at 3 in the morning. You have nothing to forgive yourself for, I said. She shook her head. I let him use me, Dad. I sat in your kitchen and told you that you might need help, and the whole time I was being operated like a puppet by someone who wanted your money. You are not a puppet. You are a daughter who was grieving her mother, and someone handed you a reason to channel that grief into action. He found the exact right crack, and he pushed on it. That is what people like him do. They find the cracks. She looked out at the yard. The cardinal was back on the feeder. I had refilled it the week before, and Eleanor would have been pleased about that. Did you ever think about just telling me? Sophie asked. About what you were doing? I thought about it, I said. I decided against it because the safest thing for you was not to know. If you had known and said something, even accidentally, the whole thing unravels. And also, I admitted, because I think I needed to handle it myself. I needed to know I still could. She turned to look at me. You did, she said. You absolutely could. We sat on the porch for another hour without talking much, which is one of the things Eleanor had always said was the real measure of a relationship. Not the conversations you have, but the silences you can share without discomfort. I did not retire. I want to be clear about that, because the easy ending to this story is the old man who has survived something terrible, going gently into his golden years, content and at peace. That is a fine ending for people who want a fine ending. But I had spent 41 years building things, and I was not ready to stop. The money was still there, all 3.8 million of it, plus the accumulated returns from 20 years of careful, boring, extremely unfashionable index fund investing that Eleanor had always insisted on and that Trevor had wanted to put into something with far more risk and far more opportunity for him to skim from the top. The money felt heavy to me now, not in a bad way, in the way that a load-bearing wall feels heavy, because it is doing real work. Frank and I had lunch in March. I told him I had been thinking. "You have been thinking since October," he said. "That is what got us here." "I want to do something with it," I said. "With the money, with what we learned." He set down his fork. "Tell me." "There are people who cannot do what I did," I said. "They do not have 22 years of relationship with an attorney they trust. They do not have the resources to hire an investigative firm. They do not know what to look for or how to fight back, or that fighting back is even an option. They just sign the papers because someone they love hands them a pen and tells them it is for their own good." Frank looked at me for a long moment. "I want to build something," I said. "A resource. Legal help, investigation, education. Something that stands between the people who are preying on the elderly and the people they are preying on." Frank was quiet for a bit. Then he said, "You know this means I have to close my practice." I raised an eyebrow. "Does it?" He smiled. "I am 63 years old, Walter. I have been practicing law for 38 years. I have drafted contracts for people who cared about nothing except how much they were going to make." He paused. "I would like to spend whatever time I have left doing something that actually matters." So we did it. We filed the incorporation paperwork for the Greer Foundation in April. We hired 3 attorneys, 2 investigators, and an intake coordinator named Brenda, who had previously run a domestic violence hotline and who understood better than almost anyone how to speak to someone who was frightened and ashamed and did not entirely believe they deserved help. We set up a phone line. We built a partnership with Adult Protective Services and 3 law enforcement agencies in Middle Tennessee. We started taking cases. The calls started the first week. A man in Murfreesboro whose stepchildren had been slowly transferring money out of an account he shared with his late wife, $1,000 at a time, over 18 months. A woman in Clarksville whose son had taken out a home equity loan in her name without her knowledge and used it to pay down his gambling debts. A couple in Cookville whose nephew, not unlike my own, had convinced them to sign documents they did not fully understand. Documents that gave him legal authority over decisions that should have been theirs alone. We helped them all. It was not glamorous work. It did not look like what you see in courtroom dramas. It looked like phone calls and document reviews and long conversations with frightened people who needed someone to tell them clearly that what was happening to them was wrong, that it had a name, that there were laws against it, and that those laws applied to them just as much as they applied to anyone else. Sophie came on board 6 months after we opened. She had taken a leave of absence from her school, ostensibly for personal reasons, and she drove down from Memphis with 2 boxes and a determination that I recognized from her mother. She started as a volunteer, sitting with families, listening to their stories. She was extraordinary at it in a way that took me by surprise, even though it probably should not have. One evening I was in my office reviewing case files when she knocked on the door. "There is someone asking for you specifically," she said. "I tried to take the intake, but he says he heard about you from Dennis's daughter, and he wants to speak with the man who started this." "Send him in," I said. He was in his mid-30s, broad-shouldered, sitting on the edge of the chair the way people sit when they are not sure they deserve to be there. His name was Kevin. His grandmother was 81. She had met a man at her church 6 months earlier, a widower, attentive and warm and full of small, careful kindnesses. In the past 3 months, she had given him $60,000 for what he described as a temporary business difficulty. The week before Kevin came to see me, the man had suggested that her house was too big for one person and that he knew a developer who could make a very good offer. Kevin had a folder on his lap with documents in it, a lease agreement signed in his grandmother's name for a storage facility no one had ever heard of, and a photograph of the man from church standing outside a property in 2 different states on the same day, which is the kind of thing that requires a particular kind of investigation to discover, and the kind of thing that Kevin, on his own, had no idea how to investigate. "Tell me everything," I said. He talked. I listened. When he was done, I picked up the phone and called Frank. New case, I said. Get the team together. I hung up and looked at Kevin. We are going to help your grandmother, I said. I want you to know that clearly. He pressed his lips together. He was holding himself very carefully, the way people do when they are close to the edge of composure. Thank you, he said. I did not know where else to go. The right place? I said. He nodded and looked out the window, and for a moment his expression was the same expression I had seen on Sophie's face that Sunday on the back porch, the expression of someone who has been carrying something too heavy for too long and has just been told they can set it down. I thought about Trevor in that moment, which I still do sometimes. Not with anger anymore, mostly. Anger is an expensive emotion to maintain, and I have always been careful with my resources. I think about him the way I think about a structural failure I studied in school. A bridge in Washington state that collapsed in 1940 because its designers had not accounted for resonance, had not understood that the very forces they had built the thing to withstand were also capable, at the right frequency, of tearing it apart. Trevor had built his entire scheme on the assumption that I was too old to be dangerous, too slow to be strategic, too broken by grief to pay attention. He had not accounted for the fact that grief does not make you careless. Grief makes you careful, because you know better than anyone what it costs to lose something you cannot replace. He had not accounted for the fact that a man who has spent his life understanding how things are built also understands exactly how they fall down. Do not mistake patience for weakness. Do not mistake quietness for confusion. Do not assume that the man sitting across the table from you with slightly unfocused eyes and trembling hands has not already counted every exit in the room and identified every fault in your plan. The wolves are always watching, Trevor told me once, on one of our phone calls, referring to the competitive real estate market and his need to move fast and be ruthless. He thought he was being impressive. He was right, though. The wolves are always watching. He just had the wrong wolf in mind. My name is Walter Greer. I am 70 years old. I am the founder of the Greer Foundation, which in its first year helped 43 families in Middle Tennessee protect a combined total of just over $9 million from people who believed that age was a vulnerability and grief was an opportunity. Every morning I get up before sunrise and I make coffee the way Eleanor liked it. Stronger than most people can tolerate. I sit at the kitchen table and I look out at the bird feeder and I think about the work ahead. If you are listening to this and something about it sounds familiar, if there is someone in your life who has been asking questions they should not be asking, who has been feeding stories to people you trust, who has been making a careful study of your confusion and your loneliness, I want you to hear this clearly. You are not alone, you are not helpless, and the law is on your side in ways that most people do not know until someone tells them. That is what we are here for. Drop a comment and tell me where you are listening from tonight. Tell me if this story sounds like something you have seen. And if there is someone you are worried about, reach out. We will answer. Underestimating a patient man is always a mistake. I was patient for 5 months. I will be patient for as long as it takes. Until next time, build things that last. And know the difference between the cracks that are just age and the cracks that someone has been making wider on purpose. I learned that difference the hard way. Now I am passing it on.